Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Hot Mike. I'm Bill Whittle, and I'm here with my good friend and fellow conservative out here in Hollywood. I used to think it was just the two of us. Jeremy Boring, who's the chief operating officer of Forward Publishing and puts out Daily Wire, and he's also the executive director of Friends of Abe, which is an organization for conservatives in Hollywood. Jeremy, we talked about some of the things that soldiers and stuntmen and other people have had to endure in terms of just humiliation. And the decision as to whether or not they want to work and feed their families, or whether or not they want to agree with all these slanders and lies against our country and the president and the servicemen and so on. But there's another side to this, and you said a line. I think it was you. Oh, maybe it wasn't. But anyway, there's a line that says that every deal in Hollywood is sealed in flesh. Can you talk to us a little bit about that? This is almost unbelievable.
You know, Don Henley referred to Hollywood as Gomorrah by the sea. And I think that's pretty apt. You know, there's sort of a Babylon motif that's always been a part of Hollywood, even in the 20s. And you know, it's a place of decadence. It's a place of it's dedicated to finding ways to titillate the flesh. And so probably,
and I hate to interrupt you.
No, please.
Just very briefly, the reason I had to just charge in here is it's absolutely true. If you go to the Kodak Theater, where they have the Oscars every year now in Hollywood, the entire motif is Babylon. They've got winged lions, and they've got it's just shocking, really. I'm sorry, I just had to throw that in. I remember looking around at where the Oscars are broadcast from, and I thought, what is going on?
Yeah, I mean, and it's always been that. You know, I say sometimes that when you live in LA long enough, pretty soon you start getting a stream of people whose grandmas knew your grandma or some other thing, and they just got off the bus fresh-faced in town, and so you take a meeting with them to kind of give them a little advice and a little shove in the right direction. And many times over the years, some wet behind the ears young actor from the Midwest will sit down across from me in the office and say, you know, I'm a Christian, and I'm just here because I want to reclaim Hollywood for Christ. And I always have to tell them, he was never here. Like, that's not what Hollywood is. That's not what Hollywood has ever been.
No, he's away for the summer. He's up in, yeah. Got it. But even big stars, major names, basically sexual activity with producers is almost part of the deal, right? It's almost in the contract, for God's sakes.
Yeah, I think all of these are sort of the same issue. You know, we started off talking about Last Man Standing, and my take is only very slightly different than yours. But it goes to this very topic, which is I don't believe that Last Man Standing was canceled because of the conservatism of Tim Allen or the conservatism of the show. If that were the case, Tim Allen's conservatism was known to the studio before and the network before they ever picked up the show. It's slightly more subtle than that. It's that Tim Allen's show was expensive because it had a big star. It was going into its 7th season, which is a point at which Tim Allen was in a position to renegotiate. It was at a point at which the network had to start absorbing more of the costs from the studio. There's a whole phenomenon in Hollywood where, because of the changing economy in Hollywood, in the old days, a network didn't care what studio produced the show. Now they care very much about whether or not they own a significant enough part of the back end of the show. So even though Tim Allen's show did very well on Friday nights, it was doing amazing numbers in syndication. It was an expensive show, and they were trying to move away as a network, ABC, from having multi-camera comedies on Friday night. And so in that sense, they did create a situation where you would actually ask yourself as a network, what shows do we salvage from our Friday night comedy block, and which ones do we not? I don't think that it's just someone woke up one day and said, I can't stand this conservative being on the air anymore, let's fire him. But what it is that when decisions have to be made, when shows are on the bubble, when there are alternatives, that's when the sort of X factor of politics or worldview come into play. And, you know, in that situation, the sort of embarrassment that you might feel because you have this conservative show on your network, the kind of fact that you have to shuffle your feet a little bit when you tell the people at the cocktail party down the street that you're producing this pro-Trump schlock on your air. That's when it really. I mean, we have these obvious horror stories like what happened to Mike Schlitz and others, but I do think those are the exception. The real bias that happens in Hollywood is what happened to Last Man Standing. It's that in the gray, it's always going to break against the conservative. Conservatives work. John Voight, very open with his politics, works. Clint Eastwood, very open with his politics, works. Tim Allen works. Duck Dynasty, a huge hit in its time. But when there are moments where gray happens, that's when the kind of bias really presents itself. But not to say that there's not more overt bias, but I think the overt bias, at least we can talk about it. And if George Clooney were sitting here in the room with me and heard what happened to your friend Mike, he would agree that was an outrage. But the day-to-day bias that happens against conservatives happens more subtly, and I don't think it's part of like a formal blacklist or a set agenda. It's just the result of the fact that the people who have power in Hollywood have unchecked power, because the people who don't have power in Hollywood want to be a part of what this town and community offers so badly that they will suffer so many indignities. There's never pushback against the people in power. And that bad power dynamic creates bad behavior. That bad power dynamic creates bad behavior even in otherwise affable, decent fellows who would never say anything if knowingly to hurt the feelings of a conservative if they knew that the conservative was in the room. But they never have to acknowledge that there is the possibility of a conservative in the room. And so they act the way that you might act, that you might act in a locker room somewhere. They don't check themselves at all.
That's right. We really have heard so many cases, you and I personally, of those two different kinds of things. One case where somebody literally said, some producer was angry, came onto the set, and he says, "I'm really, really angry. I want to I need to fire a Republican today." That kind of thing.
That certainly happens.
But as you say, untold stories that we've heard directly, untold stories of people who had great working relationships with casting directors or with certain actors or something, and then they reveal, by accident usually, that they're conservatives, and the face on their friends just is filled with amazement, really, more than hatred, just shocked. And then the next thing you know, Jeremy, the calls just don't come, right? The casting calls just don't come. And you can't say it's because of this, but you know it is. And it is,
and in fact, if you were
shameful thing.
That's right. If you were to talk, I'm sure that the executives at ABC right now are reading all the stories. Our own John Nolte at Daily Wire was one of the people who really brought this story to the fore about Last Man Standing with a piece that got 1.5 million page views on the day that it first broke. And I'm sure that the executives at ABC were shocked when they read these pieces, because in their mind, they didn't cancel Tim Allen's show because of his conservatism. They would be able to tell you with a straight face, that's nonsense. In fact, one of the executives did say, "I don't think that Tim's politics were the main issue here," which I find kind of shockingly honest. It probably wasn't the main issue. Yeah. That doesn't mean it wasn't the deciding issue, because the main issues were the issues of economics and contract law and other things. But down in the quiet place, down in the gray, there's also this little bit of embarrassment. So that's the easiest one to cut.
You bet. Jeremy, I'd love to do this again and soon. It's great talking to you about all this. It's great to hear an inside voice. And thanks very much for joining us from way down the street there.
Bill, thank you for having me.
Okay. Folks, it's really what he said. And of all the things that are the most startling to me in Hollywood, the thing that startles me the most is the absolute assumption that you are a liberal, that you would walk into meetings with a script that you're trying to sell, and it's a top-level meeting with studio people. And before they even start the meeting, they'll say, "Hey, okay, great, let's get going. By the way, I'm an Obama bundler. How much can I put you down for?" And then you can talk to me about selling this script that is your lifelong dream. The number of people who openly, just anybody, to utter complete strangers, says, "These two Republicans and Donald," just the assumption that if you live in this town or certainly work in this business, you're a big old progressive. And as I say, Hollywood has the entire spectrum of political thought from far left on one hand to the extreme left on the other. So this thing is real. In any event, we'll have more stories to talk about as we get further and further into the show. It's a pleasure to be here on NRA, the home of real Americans who understand actual values. We will be back tomorrow. This is Hot Mike with Bill Whittle right here on NRATV.